Hello, welcome back to my channel. I am Monet and you're watching Life is Monet. It is that time of the year again where I reflect back on all of the books that I've read throughout 2022 and talk about my best, worst, and most disappointing books. In this video, we're going to be talking about 10 of what I deem to be the worst books that I had the displeasure of reading this year. So it's been a few months since I've read several of these books. I have not reflected on them since the time that I read them and decided that they were not good. So what I did was I went throughout my reading spreadsheet and kind of pulled out some of my lowest rating books throughout the year. And then looking at that list, I just selected books that just brought a wide array of anger emotions out of me and put that into a smaller list until I got down to really 10. So I have not actually really dived into this list just yet. So if you see me just remembering a lot of anger and rage, just let me have my moment because some things deserve to be dragged. This is in no particular order. First up, we have To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. This is a book that I tried to read and soft DNF several times throughout the last year and a half because for some reason or another, the book just wasn't working for me and I thought that I was the problem. I picked it up first to read it physically and I just assumed that maybe like my life was too busy or I just wasn't in the mood for a sci-fi, and so I ended up putting it down. Then I tried to start it on the audiobook a couple of months later and I kept having to restart the audiobook and that wasn't working either. And then I tried to pick it up physically again. I really tried with this book, and then the last time I tried a hybrid read between the physical and the audiobook. That time I did get further through reading the story. Along the way of me attempting to read this book, I also tried to read some other similar subgenres, which would be a sci-fi that is a space opera, and I've since learned that those books are just not for me. They do not pull me in. I find them to be incredibly boring, and that is what I have to say about To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. Of all of the space operas that I have tried to read, usually I make it through to the end. I don't always give them the highest ratings. I don't always continue with the series, but generally I finish those books. This is the book that made me come to terms with the fact that one, it's fucking boring, and two, I don't like space operas. So I just feel like this book was, it had the makings of being a decent book and I could see how other people may have enjoyed it, but I just did not find our main character to be interesting at all. And I also felt like all these things just kept happening around her and we were observing the story with her, and I didn't want that. I wanted the character to not just go through the motions of what's happening around them or react to what's happening around them, but like really be actively involved in the story, and that just did not happen. On top of the fact that just there was no real, like, I don't know. I just don't like space operas. That's my review of this book. Next up, we have a book that literally bored me to death, and that is The Picture of Dorian Gray. I really expected to really like this book when I started reading classics earlier this year, and this is like one that is on everyone's kind of favorites, is highly raved and talked about, and I went into it just understanding that there was going to be this interesting plot. We are following a character by the name of Dorian Gray who is young and vibrant, and he's very attractive, and he has someone draw a picture of him, and then someone kind of makes a comment about how he will never be this version of himself again in his life. Like, he can only go downhill from here, and that this picture will always just encapsulate his most youthful and vibrant self, and that as he goes through life and continues to make a series of selfish and just bad choices, that it would reflect on himself and he would just kind of end up on this decrepit path. Throughout the story, you start to see Dorian become obsessed with his imagery and the way that he is encapsulated in the picture, and trying to hold on to that youth while still making very selfish decisions. And I don't disagree with the premise of the story. I just feel like the main takeaways from The Picture of Dorian Gray of being a selfish, high-class society person was something that I enjoyed more in The Great Gatsby. I know that these books do not sound similar at all. They're not. I don't want that to be your perception, but there is a discussion, or several discussions I feel, that could be had about the moral themes in both stories and how these characters can be so out of tune and so out of touch with things that truly matter in life because they're caught up in the glitz and the glam and their power and their influence and their looks. And I just found that The Picture of Dorian Gray was just it was slowly driving me mad as a reader. Like, as he was being driven mad, he was driving me mad along with him because he just kept talking about what was happening. And that was frustrating for me as a reader, because you are watching yourself descend into madness, and as you analyze it, you have a deep enough understanding to know what's happening, yet you're still on this crash course collision. And why make a character so self-aware that they just talk about it endlessly and they go into deep depth about it? I felt like he was just on these like soliloquies of him being driven into madness, and that is what was driving him and me into madness. It wasn't actually the impacts of the story or what was happening around him. It was the fact that he kept talking about it that was driving both of us insane, and I did not enjoy it. I would much rather have characters descend into chaos and like a Glockta style form, where it's like they are aware that something's happening, something feels kind of off here, but they have these like inclinations that they don't like focus too much on what's happening. So like as a reader, you're noticing the changes. I don't find that I need my characters to be as self-aware as I am of a reader of them as they go crazy. Like just go fucking crazy. I don't need you to narrate me through your madness. The next book we have is what I think was one of my like most polarizing 1-star reads of the year, and that is going to be The House of Sky and Breath. This was a heaping pile of trash. It could not have been edited. I don't think it was even proofread. This book did nothing for the plot or the story. Like it was, I can't even say that it was vibes. Like it's 900 and so pages of just BS, because we got no progression of a story. I actually feel like Sarah J Maas leaned so much more onto the Danica aspects, or Bryce's unawareness of her friendship with Danica that happened in book 1. And I feel like we explored so many secrets. Like, okay, we get it. Bryce was self-absorbed. She wasn't a good friend. She didn't pay attention to things that were around her. And Danica had this entirely different life that Bryce wasn't aware of. These are all the things that we explored in book 1. And there was still a storyline to go along with it, right? Because we're learning all these things about Danica as Bryce is feeling guilty about this. She's having to go through like this party withdrawal. She's sobering up. She's maturing. She's realizing that things around her are not the way that they seem, and that she has this responsibility to honor her friend's death and to finally show up for her and be there for her, even though Danica is no longer with us. And so when we go into book 2, we are still discovering things about Danica that Bryce didn't know, and I, for the fucking life of me, cannot understand why. What purpose does it serve? Like, I understand it in book 1 because we're building this depth of character around Bryce, but the ending of the book and where the story is shifting had really nothing to do with us continuing to discover things about Danica. I think that it's very selfish to write a story, right? Book 1 is 900 pages. Book 2 is about 900 pages. I'm guesstimating here. So 1800 pages. To write 1800 pages of a story that is dependent upon a character that we only spent 150 pages with. So we have to go, what, 1650 pages reflecting on a character. Like, how much do you think we care about her? How much do you think we care about her? You wrote her kind of decently, right? You evoked a couple of emotions from people, but like it was a one and done. You cannot keep pulling that rabbit out of the hat. You can't keep doing it. I'm no longer emotionally invested. You've burnt out that candle. So I was just very frustrated with that aspect. Not to mention this hit and go with Bryce and Hunt. I don't care for their romance. I don't know what the hell she's doing with their romance. I feel like she's trying to pump fake the readers, and I'm just not here for it. Either they're going to be in game or they're not going to be in game. I really don't care. That dynamic between Bryce and Hunt feels like a direct ripoff between Carew and Akiva from Daughter of Smoke and Bone, and that is one that I feel like Laini Taylor just did a much better job of having, kind of like this devil and angel relationship where they have all these extenuating like circumstances that are going against their relationship, as well as like we have morally great characters that are also making questionable decisions that impact these things. And I feel like she lollygagged and like fucked about for 900 pages because she knew that the ending was going to be like this explosive thing and that everybody was going to want to read the next book. And so like for that aspect, yes, I guess it was a great book because it ended at a point where like now we might have somewhere to go. But if she does in book 3 what she did in this book, which is fuck around, I'm going to be upset. Do not build up such hype around a story that you will not be able to execute. Don't do that. Don't do that to me. because then you're gonna fuck around and find out. The next book was a book that bored me to death. It was not memorable at all. I just remember every character being boring and flat and dull. I didn't care about the romance. I didn't care about the plot. I don't know how you can write a book about an assassin in training and make me hate it, because that's usually like my cup of tea, and that is going to be The Way of Shadows by Brent Weeks. I know that this is probably one of his most polarized series and that I should try a different one, but while I seriously disliked the plot and the characters and the overall point of being in that story was a waste of my time, I'm still not sure if the writing will, because the author wrote a separate series, but the writing is going to be the same. And so like, I don't want anything to follow me from The Way of Shadows. Like, I don't want the plot, the characters, the storyline. I don't want the author and his writing. So like, how am I going to read the next series if he's coming along? I don't want him either. I want everything to be thrown away. But I can't even like really recall like in detail this book. I know I had a review where I slightly ranted about it. I'll insert that clip. It sucked. I mean, wow. Like, it was ass. It was really ass. And like, I finished the book only because I was in disbelief of how bad it sucked. I switched to the audiobook. And as I'm listening to the audiobook and just really grasping the gravity of like how terrible this book was, I went to Goodreads and I was staring at the very high rating on Goodreads and staring at all of the people who gave it 5 stars. It has like over 100,000 Goodreads reviews. And like, I'm on Goodreads trying to make sense of it as I'm listening to the audiobook, because it's not, the math isn't mathing. It's not connecting for me. The plot, weak. The characters, weak. The sexual tension, weak. That little love interest, I wanted her dead. Kill her, please, so we can move on. Like, I just wanted everybody on page to just die. What a waste of my time. What a waste of my time. So that pretty much sums it up. I had this as a bind up where all 3 books was in one. I quickly unhauled that book. The 5th book that I read and strongly disliked this year is going to be A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. I was sad and disappointed that this book was not what I thought it was. I feel like V.E. Schwab, of all the books that I've read from her, she has a wide array of like writing skills, and so far, even though each book has been written differently, I've been able to still kind of enjoy the books for what it's worth. But this book was as boring as The Way of Shadows. I cannot tell you a single memorable thing that happened in the story. This book, of all the books that I read this year, is probably the single like most forgettable story, and I've been going back and forth on whether or not I should continue, but the reviews that I've heard is that book 2 is actually like the least book in the series, and so I'm like, if I strongly disliked, almost to the point of hate, book 1, and book 2 is not good even for fans of the story, then why should I continue? I feel like this is a series that I'm going to unhaul, and it just may not be for me, and that's okay, because I've still enjoyed other stories by V.E. Schwab. And then we have Upgrade by Blake Crouch. I read Recursion by this author as well as Dark Matter. These are books that I did not necessarily love, but I enjoyed for the most part. I think I gave Recursion like 3.5 out of 5 stars. So they haven't like just been so bad to the point where I did not want to read from the author again. And I was kind of excited after having read their backlist to be able to read a new release by this author, but it was just a total and complete flop. This is another book that I feel like was kind of forgettable. We're following a main character who has experienced this upgrade to his body, so he is a more advanced human. He's stronger, faster, he can see clearer, and there is this bit of a conspiracy to bring that upgrade to society and the impacts that that's gonna have. And so there is like a heavy sci-fi component to this story, but I just felt like the character just was not compelling. Like, he was a vehicle in which the story was moving throughout, but I was not interested in him at all. I don't feel like he was fleshed out at all. And that to me made me feel like the stakes of the story was just not as high as it should have been. And by the time we came around to the climax and the resolution, I was almost completely checked out of the story. And I was so disappointed in this book that I almost feel like, because this is my third book by Blake Crouch, none of them I have given 4 or 5 stars even. Maybe it's just time to get off this train and stop reading from this author, because it's becoming hit or miss whether or not I'll slightly enjoy a story or just dislike it entirely. Then we have Love and Other Words by Christina Lauren. I just want to apologize to my friends who had to listen to me rant about this book for about an hour, because I'm talking seriously enraged at this book. I can't remember their names. If I do, it'll just piss me off all over again. But the male and female character dated in the past, and she is now engaged to someone else in the future, and then she kind of like comes across him years later, and you're having a bit of like 2 timelines where they're trying to reconnect through like this awkward connection in the present, as well as like figuring out what happened in the past that broke them up. And you know that it's going to be something very traumatic, because like they haven't spoken since. And I can't really talk about what I didn't like about the story without spoiling it, so I will just say that my investment in the story and my belief in them as a couple was extremely tepid, and it went down the drain like the itsy bitsy spider when we got to the reveal of the plot. Because then it went from I don't really believe in them as a couple to you have to be fucking kidding me that they're gonna be a couple after this. So if you don't want to have spoilers, please jump ahead to the next segment of the video, because I'm gonna put a big old spoiler sign down here. First of all, let me figure out the names of the characters in the book, because if I'm gonna drag them, I should at least do it properly. Give me a second. So the big reveal of this goddamn story is that Macy and Elliot, if I remember correctly, they go to like different colleges, right, when they graduate high school, and they're trying to kind of make it work long distance. And one day, Macy shows up to Elliot's apartment after a party, and his friends, first of all, one of his friends is just like, no, don't go in there. He might be indecently exposed, and like doesn't really try to stop her, right? So she goes into this room, she sees Elliot with this other female character, and they're just kind of like laying there naked, and you know, his stuff is out and whatever. So then they never really speak again. Years later, when they finally rehash this incident, Elliot reflects on it as though he was so intoxicated and so out of it that he genuinely believed that this female that he was caught having sexual relations with was Macy, and that in his mind it was Macy who was sucking on his little weenie. And after he woke up and realized that his visions had betrayed him, he was so messed up that he was never really able to share his body with anyone again. And that when he got with his most recent girlfriend, when she tried to suck his little weenie, he was like, no, don't suck it, because I have trauma, because I had a sex dream about my girl while I was sexing another girl. And fucking Macy said, oh my God, I'm sorry that I did that to you. I am sorry that you experienced trauma while you were cheating on me. That book really truly pissed me off, because I remember vividly, like I don't own a copy of the book, and I was listening to it via audio, but I remember vividly in the story when Macy showed up and the friend was trying to like stop her from going in there before she caught Elliot with this girl. He said explicitly they fool around from time to time, and that really wasn't resolved when they rehashed it in the present, because he was just like, oh yeah, he's just stupid, he doesn't know what he's talking about. The friend that's your roommate that lives with you, that see that girl in your room all the time, he don't know what he's talking about? Huh? Like, I wanted to like reach through the book and punch. I wanted to punch both of them. The witness is a fucking eyewitness to your foolery, and they don't know what they're talking about. They knew that girl was in your room. They knew that y'all had sexual relations, right? He didn't lie about that part. So like he told a quarter of a lie in the middle of like 3 truths. Please, you've got to be shitting me. I'm sorry that this video is chaotic, but I realize now that I left out another big segment as I was reviewing this book that really pissed me off. After all of these things happened where Macy caught her boyfriend cheating on her, she left and she was very, very distraught, and she calls her father to come and pick her up. Her father drives throughout the night to come and grab her, and as she's in the car having a bit of a hysterical breakdown because of the scene that she just witnessed, her father is trying to console her, and during this time they get into a car crash, and in the car crash she actually loses her father. And so a huge part of this time period in her life was just met by betrayal and grief and loss of someone that she really truly loved. And I just felt like Macy got no resolution for that aspect. That's something that just really truly enrages me. I don't understand the point of putting that component in the story and then turning around and making Macy apologize to Elliot because of an event that she had nothing to do with. Like, I am still mind blown that that was the ending of this story, but I strongly believe that they do not belong together. And the anger that I feel that after this event happened, they wrote in the story that her father passed as a result of this. Like, I'm not blaming Elliot for the fact that her father got into this car crash, but he would not have been driving all fucking night to pick up his crying snotty-nosed fucking daughter if this situation had not happened. Like, I was not rooting for the characters, and then after that happened, I was anti-rooting for them. I would have took a picket sign outside and said, break up. You need to break up, because both of you are delusional. Both of you are deranged. You have to be out your mind if you think you're gonna convince me to apologize for something that you did that I wasn't even there, right? I wasn't even in the room. Crazy. So the next book is the first installation in a series that I wanted to read this year as well, and I had a list of like series that I wanted to start, and I started with the Way of Shadows and the Darker Shade of Magic, and by the time I got to the Raven Boy cycle, it was just one disappointment after another, so I kind of just scrapped that whole series TBR I had because it was not going as planned. This story I feel like was very this book felt not even like a first draft, but it felt like the idea of a story, and like the author was just kind of like getting words out there on a paper to later on shift around and edit and like make a real version, like a draft version, except that never happened. So it felt like a splatter of just like, here's kind of like where I want to go and like what I want to do with a story, and wouldn't it be cool if like this was done, and ooh, this will really shock them if I put this little twist here with none of the linking connections throughout the story. And so I truly feel like the book should have been rewritten. Like, it should have been redone. It should have been like a second rendition. If you continue with the series, especially like if you read the Raven Boys when you were younger, you had a higher level of like patience and leeway that you gave the author, and eventually you just kind of forget that the first book sucks. I kind of just feel like I missed the mark for this story because I really could not see what people enjoyed about it. I feel like most people enjoyed the idea of it and what it later came to be. They enjoyed the possibilities and maybe they believed the possibilities that the author was trying to sell, but the reality of what was in that book was not good. Then we have Electra. This is a book that made me realize that I am just done with Greek retellings, and that I want society to be released from the shackles of World War II and Greek mythology, because boy, they are pushing out the books and I'm just like, you don't want to just explore something else? Maybe. Like, some of these stories are starting to feel like a repeat. I was interested in Electra because we were going to be following what I thought was going to be Electra, but in the book we actually follow about 3 or 4 characters. One of the most compelling characters in the story that actually keeps the reader engaged from DNFing the book, I feel, is not even Electra. Electra's boring. Like, I don't care about her. The book could have been called something else. But the character that is most interesting gets a terrible ending to the story. And so it's like, I stuck around not even for the main show. Like, I stuck around for a side character, for a side plot, and it went to hell. So like, what was I here for? What was I here for? Other than that, I just feel like the women were not as compelling as the author attempted for them to be. And it failed to execute 3 different characters three different ways, right? Because women are not the same. And so like we're watching different women experience different things, and like each storyline, like the culmination of the ending, it flopped 3 times across the board. And I feel like that was 3 opportunities that was just, it was missed. Yeah. And then the last book that I read is another book that I cannot talk about without spoiling, and so I'll try to just give a short opinion, and then you'll have to skip ahead if you don't want to be spoiled for the book. But the last book that I read, and this is the one that I remember vividly and strongly dislike, that is going to be You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty. I just firstly want to say I hope Akwaeke never in their life writes another romance story, because I don't think that this was a romance. That's a questionable description in and of itself. It was incredibly messy for no other reason but to be scandalized. Like, I feel like the attempt was to scandalize the readers into being like, ooh, like, I can't believe I'm reading this. Like, this is so taboo. But like, there was no substance or sustenance to the story, and the romance was not compelling. I don't even, like, the book didn't even end with them being together. It was like the idea of them being together was there, but really we watched a shitty person explore being a shitty person while having shitty friends and shitty love interests. And yeah, so that was like my non-spoilery review of the book, so you've been forewarned. So in this book, we have a character by the name of Faye, and Faye is a widow. They lost their husband in a bad car accident, and they experienced still some trauma from that incident. Faye is also an artist that does paintings in blood. I guess it's a way to like tap into their trauma, and something that is just most like complicated and complex with them, and turning it into art. So they don't use human blood, they use pig's blood to do these paintings, but we never really explore what that means. We just get a description of the accident and how Faye experienced it, and then we talk a little bit about how Faye kind of manipulates her trauma to produce something to the world, and that pretty much is just cut off right there. So Faye just is out one day, she wants to have sex with somebody, and so she just kind of finds a guy in the party, fucks him in the bathroom, and then that's it. And then her and this guy become fuck friends for a couple of months, and then a couple of months into like their fuck relationship, she meets his friends, and one of his friends kind of like hits on her, and she like blows up and is like, you got me messed up, how dare you, you know I'm here with your friend, da 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 da. All that happens, and then boom, they start kind of like courting one another. I don't want to say they're dating, but they start exploring feelings for one another, and the homeboy that she started off having sex in the bathroom with has to come to terms with the fact that they are exploring the possibility of their relationship. And so that's one thing. We don't really get resolution in that area. The friend just kind of lets it go, whatever. And so the new homeboy now invites Faye to travel to this island where he's from to put on a show, because his father is this famous chef and he has power and influence, and he's doing an art show, and the son wants Faye to enter as one of the artists in the showcase. And so as soon as Faye travels to this island, she has this attraction to his father. And then we find out that the father of the homeboy's friend is the love interest between Faye and the story. So we have to watch Faye do this awkward cringe jump again. Now technically she hasn't had sex with the son, she's just kind of exploring. They've done some like light kisses on the cheeks, they've done a couple of dates. Like, he was basically courting her, taking it slowly, and you think that as a reader, like, since she started having sex with the homeboy out of nowhere and it was really just like this thing to do, that like she's gonna slowly enter this relationship with his friend, so that it can actually bloom into something else. But I guess that was just to placate the idea that she was gonna hop from the son to the father. And part of the reason why the father is so adamant about dating Faye, even after his son and daughter are like blowing up of, we're never going to talk to you again, what are you doing? We find out that the father, after the mom passed away, he's bisexual, and so he meets and falls in love with a man, and his son and daughter say, oh my god, like, you're bisexual. Even though he's never hidden it from his kids, they still can't come to terms with the idea that their father's dating a man, and so they basically threaten to cut him off if he doesn't cut the man off. And so he breaks up with like the second love of his life, and so he's been like this alone person for years, and then Feiyi comes. And so like the situation kind of goes the same way, where Feiyi is now his new like love interest, and the kids are like, you can't just date your son's girlfriend, and da 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 da. So like that is the overall plot of the story. It is literally mess for the sake of mess with no resolution, because Feiyi and the father do not even really end up together at all. So I still to this day can't wrap my mind around like the point of doing this. And Feiyi never really apologizes for this transition. And so the son, as a reader, you see him as someone who's been wronged, right? And so when he finds out the situation, he comes back, he blows up. He's like, get your crap, get out of my father's house, you're not allowed to be here. So we do this switch where he's now a terrible person for the way that he's responding to bringing out a girl that he likes and he wants to date, and finding out that she's been having sex with his father. He didn't respond to that in a decent way, and so now he's a terrible person, and so now Feiyi and her father don't owe him anything because of the way that he blew up. And I just, what? Like, the self-righteous indignation of Feiyi throughout the entire story, I found appalling, like galling, really, even, that Feiyi never ever seen any errors in her ways of how she may be destroying family and friend ties by pursuing like inclinations. Like, she's not even truly invested in this. Like, she finds the father attractive, she kind of wants to see where it goes, but Feiyi, for the most part, I feel, has some pent up trauma that she's not really dealing with. She's just re-exploring and re-experiencing it every time she does her artwork. So she taps into that. I almost feel like it's a bit like masochistic, the way that Feiyi like handles her trauma and then pushes that pain out onto other people and destroys lives and ties along the way. And then at the end of the book, she was just like, yeah, I'm gonna go back to New York and maybe you'll come check it out, maybe we'll be together, maybe we won't be, but hey, it was nice on this island, yo. Like, I question the idea that that is a romance, because the book is very short. Like, I got an arc of this book. It's only like 275 pages, and we technically go through more than one love interest. And so the amount of time that we have after experiencing most of the story, the amount of time that Feiyi has with the true love interest in the story is very short. And so like it doesn't build a strong foundation, and we leave the book on a cliffhanger, which I think is like, I don't know what the fuck that book was, but I do know it's the worst of the year. I know that, yeah. So there are some books, like I mentioned earlier in the video, that could have been honorable mentions, but I just chose to focus on the 10 that just kind of like really grinded my gears. Of course, I would like to love every book that I read throughout the year, but when you read as much as I do, as anyone does on BookTube, you're bound to come across some that just do not match your expectations and go from disappointing to just being downright bad. And that was my experience with all of the books that I've listed in this video. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you made it to the end, and I will see you in my next one. Bye.